Have you ever had one of those stretches where you're honestly working hard on becoming a better husband, like really trying, and still have that feeling that you're not actually getting anywhere? You're listening to an episode like this one, you're trying to apply what you learned, but when you step back and look at the last few weeks, maybe the last few months, it feels like nothing's changed. You have the same struggles, you run into the same reactions, you replay the same old patterns. And if you sit in that feeling long enough, it gets really easy to start believing the old story again, that maybe I'm not changing, maybe I still don't know how to do this, maybe this just isn't who I am. And that's a really dangerous place for a man to live, because when you can't see your own progress clearly, you start losing heart. You start measuring everything by what still isn't fixed, by how far you still have to go, by whether your wife seems any more open or relaxed or trusting yet. And when that's the only scorecard you're looking at, it can start to feel like all your effort isn't doing much of anything. But I want to tell you something really important at the beginning of this episode. Sometimes the person who is worst at measuring your own growth is you. Because real change usually happens in really small ways at first. You stay in a hard conversation just a little bit longer. You catch the defensiveness just a little bit sooner. You repair after a rupture just a little bit faster. You lead with a little more honesty, openness, vulnerability. And from the inside to you, those changes can feel so small that you miss them completely. And this is really important, because if you miss them, you can talk yourself right out of the very work that's starting to change you. And to make it even harder, your wife usually can't be the one to measure that progress for you either. Not when there's been years of frustration, distance, hurt, or broken trust. She may still be watching. She may still be protecting herself. She may still need a lot more consistency before she can fully relax into what's changing in you. So if her response is the only thing you're using to decide whether this work is working on you, you're probably going to get discouraged fast. So today, I want to talk about why it's so hard to see your own growth as a husband, why discouragement can become one of the biggest threats to real change, and why men so often lose ground when they try to do this work alone. I also want to show you what actually helps a man stay in it long enough for those small changes to become something real, something steady, and something truly visible, not just to him, but to the people around him too. If you've been working on this for some time, or if you're just getting started, this is a really important topic for you to understand. So stick around, you don't want to miss this one. Welcome to Better Husband, the podcast that helps you answer the question, how can I be a better husband? I'm Angelo, a men's marriage and relationship coach, and every week I bring you practical insights to help you strengthen your marriage and become the best husband you can be. Now, I want to start this episode with a story from a very different season of my life. And just stay with me for a minute, because the story isn't about my marriage. It's not about a fight with my wife I had. It's not even really about a relationship in the way you might expect on this podcast. But there's a clear through line, I promise. It's about when I was working as a firefighter around the time my son had just been born. And even though it's a different kind of story, there's a direct connection between what I'm about to share and what so many men experience when they're trying to grow. Back then, I was working 48-hour shifts, so I'd be gone for 2 full days at a time. Then I'd come back home and be home for 4 days before going back to the station. And when my son was really little, especially in those early months and years, that rhythm created this strange experience for me. I would leave for work my shift, come home 2 days later, and it was like he had completely changed. He looked a little different. He moved a little different. There'd be some new sound he was making, some new expression on his face, some new ability, some new awareness. It felt like every time I came back, he was just a little more here, a little more himself, a little further along than when I left. And I remember how wild that felt, because when you have a little kid, especially your first, everything already feels kind of surreal. Time is strange. The days can feel long and blurry and repetitive. And then all of a sudden you look at this little person and realize, wow, you are changing fast. And I can still picture those moments, like walking back into the door and seeing him, picking him up, looking at him and feeling like I had somehow missed something in just 2 days. And then the opposite would happen. I'd come home from shift and I'd be with him day after day for the next stretch. I'd feed him, hold him, play with him, help him with bedtime, sit with him on the floor, carry him around, just be in the normal rhythm of life with him. And during those stretches, I usually didn't notice much at all. And it wasn't because I wasn't paying attention. I was right there with him. I loved being with him. I was involved. I was watching him. But when I was in it every single day, the changes didn't stand out the same way. It all felt much more gradual, much more ordinary, much harder to spot. And then I'd leave again, go to work for another 48, come back, and there it was again. Another little jump, another little shift, another version of him that felt just a bit more grown than the one I had left a couple of days before. And I remember being struck by that over and over, how obvious it felt when I had stepped away and how hard it was to notice when I was right in the middle of it. There was something about the distance that made the change easier to see. And there was something about the closeness, about being there with him in the little daily moments that made the growth feel almost invisible, even though it was happening the whole time. And I remember realizing even back then that there was something strange about that. The growth was happening the whole time. But it was easier to notice when I had a little space from it than when I was living inside it every day. Now here's the connection. Because something very similar happens when you're trying to change as a husband. When you're inside the work every day, when you're in the conversations, the frustrations, the small efforts to do things differently, it can feel like nothing is really moving. You're right there in it. You hear your own tone. You feel your own reactions. You notice every moment where you still mess up. And from the inside, the progress can feel almost invisible. But most real change doesn't happen in huge leaps. It happens in small shifts that stack up over time. In fact, a lot of those small shifts feel frustratingly small. And because they're small, your mind tends to skip right past them and focus on places where you're still struggling. This is something a lot of researchers who study behavior change have noticed. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. He describes how progress often feels invisible in the beginning because the results lag behind the effort. You can be doing the right things consistently and still feel like nothing is happening yet. He calls it the valley of disappointment. That space where you're putting in effort, but the results haven't caught up yet. And if you don't understand that phase, it's very easy to get discouraged and stop. The same thing happens in marriage. You might actually be responding differently. You might be showing up in ways that are more steady, more open, more responsible than you used to be. But because you're so close to the process, it's hard for you to see the distance you've already traveled. Instead, your mind keeps measuring the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and that gap can feel overwhelming. So the story you start telling yourself becomes, nothing's really changing. I'm still the same guy. Maybe I just can't do this. But that story isn't always true. Sometimes the real problem isn't that you're not growing, it's that you're too close to the growth to recognize it. Now, here's where this gets even more complicated, because if it's hard for you to see your own progress, you might naturally start looking to your wife to tell you whether things are getting better. You think if I'm changing, she'll notice. If I'm doing better, she'll relax. If I'm showing up differently, the relationship will feel lighter. And sometimes that does happen. But very often, especially in marriages that have been through years of frustration, distance, or repeated arguments, it doesn't happen right away. And to be clear, this isn't happening because she's trying to punish you, but because people don't experience change in real time the way we wish they would. Your wife doesn't just see the last 2 weeks of effort. She sees the last 5 years, the last 10 years. She remembers the conversations that didn't go well, the promises that didn't stick. Maybe she remembers the nights when the arguments went in circles for 2 hours, or the times you said things would change and then a month later the same pattern showed up again. Maybe she remembers the feeling of getting her hopes up and then watching things slowly slide back to the way they used to be. So when you start showing up differently now, even if the effort is real, her nervous system might still be cautious because experience has taught her to wait and see if the change lasts. So when you start making changes, even real ones, she may not immediately experience them the way you do. She might still be watching, still trying to figure out if the change is real, still protecting herself a little bit more emotionally until she sees enough consistency to trust it. And if you're using her reaction as the only way you measure your progress, that can get discouraging fast. Because from your perspective, you're working hard. You're paying attention to the things you didn't used to notice. But if she still seems cautious or guarded or unsure, your mind can start telling you the same story again. See, nothing's really changing. But what's often happening in that moment isn't that the effort isn't real. It's that trust usually moves slower than effort. And when a man doesn't understand that difference, he can make the decision to stop trying when consistency matters most. I'm hosting a free live Better Husband community call, and I want you there. It's on March 25th at 8:30 p.m. on Zoom, and you can register at joinbetterhusband.com. We're going to be focusing on ownership, integrity, and repair, and here's the best part. We'll do a live Q&A, so if you've ever had a question you wanted to ask me directly about a conversation you're stuck in, a pattern you keep repeating, or what to say after a rough moment, this is the place. Go to joinbetterhusband.com now to save your seat. I'm going to be teaching, connecting with all of you, and answering questions live. Again, joinbetterhusband.com, and I'll see you on March 25th. All right, back to the episode. So now you have two things working against you at the same time. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. First, it's hard for you to see your own progress clearly because you're living inside the work every day. And second, the person you most want reassurance from, your wife, may not be able to reflect that progress back to you yet. So what happens to a lot of men in that space? They get discouraged. They start telling themselves it's not working. Maybe I'm not changing. Maybe I don't know how to do this. And when that story takes hold, a man starts losing ground. He stops trying as hard. He slips back into old reactions. He stops paying attention to the small moments where he could respond differently, all because he's starting to lose hope. This is the main reason why I'm so adamant about reminding you that you are not meant to do this alone. None of us were meant to do it alone. Growth does not happen in isolation. When you're doing this work alone, the only voice in your head measuring your progress is your own, and that voice isn't always a fair judge. You know that voice. I don't have to describe it for you. We all have it. It's critical, it's unkind, it's discouraging. It tends to focus on what's still wrong, what you still haven't fixed, how far you still have to go. And without anyone else around you who understands the work you're doing, it's very easy for that voice to convince you that nothing meaningful is happening. But something interesting happens when men are around other men who are walking the same path. They notice things about you that you can't see. And I see this happen all the time when men start talking honestly with each other about their marriages. One guy will describe a conversation he had with his wife, and he'll say something like, "Yeah, but I still handled it pretty badly." And another man in the room will stop him and say, "Wait a minute. Last time you told a similar story, you shut down and walked away. This time you stayed and you finished the conversation. That's different." And often that's exactly what that guy needed to hear. Something else that happens in a community is accountability. One guy might catch the moment when another man is slipping back into an old pattern and call it out before it grows. Sometimes they encourage each other. Sometimes they challenge each other. But either way, they help each other see themselves more clearly. And clarity is so important because, like I said before, transformation happens through small changes over and over again over time. And when those changes are hard for you to see for yourself, having other people who can reflect them back to you can make the difference between a man staying in the work or giving up on himself, and ultimately giving up on his marriage. One of the things I have men do inside of Better Husband Academy every single week is really simple. On Monday, I ask them to set an intention for the week. How do you want to show up this week? What commitment are you making? What's one actual tangible step you're going to take in your marriage or in yourself before this week is over? And then on Friday, I ask them to come back and share their wins. What are you celebrating? Where did you follow through? What challenge came up that you handled even a little bit better than you would have 6 months ago? And the reason I do that is not because every week is going to be amazing. It won't be. Not every week is going to feel strong. Not every week is going to feel clear. Some weeks you're going to feel steady and proud of how you showed up, and other weeks you're going to feel like you took a step backwards. That's real life. That's marriage, and that's growth. But when a man has a place where he's naming his commitments and then naming his wins week after week after week, something starts to happen. He begins building evidence that he is changing, evidence that he is following through, evidence that the old version of him is not the only version of him anymore. And just as important, other men are seeing it too. They've heard the commitments he'd made. They've heard the stories. They've heard the moments that were hard, and they've heard the moments where he handled it better. So when he has a bad week or a bad moment or a conversation that goes sideways, he's not left alone inside that moment trying to decide what it means, because that's what happens to a lot of men. One bad moment and suddenly it feels like none of the progress counts. But the men around him can say, "No, that's not true. This week was hard. That moment was real, but it does not erase the ground you've already gained. Because when you're right in the middle of discouragement, it's hard to see the beauty of the progress you've already made. It's hard to remember the wins. It's hard to hold on to what's true. That's one of the reasons men need other men in this work, not just for motivation, for perspective, for truth, for someone to remind you that one bad week does not cancel out a year of becoming someone different. So if you want to take what we talked about today and actually apply it this week, let's close this episode the same way we always do, with a quick awareness, action, and accountability practice. Let's start with awareness. Answer this question. Where in your life as a husband have you started changing in small ways but discounted it because it doesn't feel big enough yet? Take the time to think about it and really get honest with yourself. Celebrate the progress and don't let your own negative thoughts diminish what you've done. Here are your action steps for the week. 4 simple things you can do. First, write down 3 small ways you've shown up differently lately. Name the small things. Maybe you've caught yourself before you shut down. Maybe you stayed present in a tough moment. Maybe you repaired faster. Start training yourself to notice what's already happening. Writing them down matters because our minds tend to forget progress quickly and remember mistakes vividly. Second, stop using your wife's immediate response as your only scoreboard. Her reaction matters, of course it does, but if trust has been worn down over time, her trust is probably going to rebuild slower than your effort. Don't make that mean nothing is changing. Third, keep going with the small, repeatable things. You do not need some huge breakthrough this week. You need consistency. One more honest conversation, one more moment of staying instead of shutting down, one more repair. That's how this builds. And fourth, let another man into your process. Not a guy who's just going to pat you on the back no matter what. A man who can actually see you clearly, someone who can tell you the truth, encourage you when you're growing, and call you out when the old habits start taking back over. And the need for accountability is exactly why I believe so deeply in men doing this work in community, because there are some things you just cannot see clearly by yourself. You need other men who understand what it means to try to become a better husband. Men who can hear the story you're telling yourself and say, no, that's not the whole truth. Men who can remind you where you started. Men who can challenge you when you're spinning your wheels. Men who can encourage you when you're actually making progress, even if it still feels slow. And if you want a taste of what that kind of support looks like, I'm hosting a live Better Husband community call at the end of the month, and I want you there. I'm going to be bringing guys from all over the world together just to have a conversation. I'm going to share more about myself and my journey. I'm going to do some teaching just like I do here on this podcast. I'm going to open it up for live Q&A so you can ask me questions that you have. And I'm going to share more about what the Better Husband community is all about. I'm hosting this first one at the end of March on March 25th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But my plan is to host these every single month, and I want you at every single one. Just go to joinbetterhusband.com or click the link at the bottom of the show notes, and I'll send you the Zoom link and more information for the call. If you're ready to stop doing this alone and just see and witness other men who are also in a similar place that you are, go to joinbetterhusband.com, and I'll see you at the call at the end of the month. Now, if nothing else, here's what I want you to take away from this episode. You may be making more progress than you realize. The hard part is that real change usually shows up slowly before it shows up clearly. So don't let discouragement talk you out of the work before the work has had time to reveal itself. And don't keep trying to measure all of this by yourself because you were never meant to do it alone. If you're trying to become a better husband, let other men walk with you in it. Let them encourage you. Let them challenge you. Let them remind you of what's changing when you're too close to see it yourself. I'm grateful you're here and allowing me to be a part of your journey. You're listening to Better Husband. I'm Angelo Santiago. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have a quick request. If you've ever gotten any value from the show and you want the show to continue to grow, to access bigger and more knowledgeable guests, and to keep providing you with more ways that you can be a better husband in your marriage, simply leave a rating and a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a few seconds, and those reviews go a long way in attracting more experts and bigger guests to the show. So if you're feeling up to it, as a favor to me, I'd love to see a rating and a review from you. Thank you so much for being a listener and all your support.